So today I want to talk to you about the story about Joseph right in the Bible, because some people talk about this story like it's just some family drama, but it's actually a blueprint for inner life.
You don't say.
Because see, Joseph's life flips so fast, right? One moment he's favored, and then the next moment he's betrayed and he hits rock bottom, right? So in Genesis chapter 37, verse 24, they say his brothers took him and cast him in a pit, and the pit was empty and there was no water in it. Now this line is important because no water means no comfort, no rescue. He was meant to die in there. He was empty, right? But here's the real translation, right? The pit is where your identity gets separated from your image, right? There's no titles, there's no validation, and there's no proverbial coat, right? It gets stripped. So now you can meet the real you. Because see, in the Bible, when they talk about clothing, they're talking about your external covering, right? Your persona, your ego. Right, and then next it says that Joseph ends up in the Potiphar's house. And then the text repeats something that matters more than most people realize. You see, Genesis chapter 39 verse 2, it says that the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now even though he was a slave, he's still prosperous. Right, this is the mentality that you have to continue to keep. Because notice that it didn't say that his life got easier, right? It says that God was with him and Joseph became steady. Because, see, a lot of times in modern spirituality and this manifestation thing, people want to manifest all kinds of crazy shit, right? But they don't want to master what it is for them to take it.
I get it.
But Joseph shows mastery, right? He has presence, right? It produces competency and alignment, which then produces consistency, which then ends up creating what he wanted to have in life. Excuse me. Right, and then here comes the integrity test, right? Because he's tempted, he's pressured, and he's given consequences, but Joseph doesn't refuse to betray his own conscience, and he pays for it. Because in chapter 39, verse 20, his master took it to him in a jail, right? It puts him in prison. They placed him in the prisoners where the king's prisoners were bound. But watch the next verse, because this is where it starts to interpret your own hard season, right? Because in verse 21, it says that the Lord was with Joseph, and it showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keepers of the prison. So even though that Joseph was restricted, he was still favored. Even though that he was confused and confined, right? He was being formed, he was being shaped.
What?
And then comes a turn that nobody could schedule. You know, Pharaoh calls for Joseph, and Joseph comes and interprets Pharaoh's dream. And when he gets done, he doesn't just say, "Good job, man, I appreciate the advice." He hands him authority. In chapter 41, verse 41, Pharaoh says, "I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Only in throne will I be greater than you." This shows that Joseph didn't just get out of prison, he stepped into power with purpose. Not because he campaigned for it, but because he played the role which was given to him, and he stayed faithful. Because that same God or consciousness that was with him in the pit was with him in the prison, which then led him to the palace. All those plights gave Joseph the skill and character needed for when the door opened and the opportunities came.
I can feel something inside me say, I really don't think you're strong enough.
You know, God didn't just pull him out, he positioned him over. So the story of Joseph isn't about a person. It's about the pattern that we need to ultimately create the life that we want to live. You know, the pit collapses the old identity. You know, in the prison is a training of the inner man, where the character is forged and the perception is refined. And then the palace is the overall state of consciousness and the result of the fortitude. So the moment that you stop reacting to life and start governing it, right, and start understanding that what looks like delay is often design, and what looks like betrayal is often redirection, and when you stay faithful to the palace hidden within your consciousness, life doesn't just change around you. Something within you changes. Because the real promotion isn't a title. The real promotion is becoming the kind of person who can be trusted with the increase. Right? So on a deeper spiritual level, or in psychological level, right, prison means, right, that your outer life gets limited so your inner life can be matured. Right? It's the season where you can't run, right? You can't perform, you can't lie, you can't dance, you can't distract yourself. So you got to end up learning patience, emotional control, discernment, and self-leadership. And that's how Joseph stays clean in a dirty season, right? He keeps serving, right? He keeps sharpening his gift. He keeps the spirit intact. And then the moment comes, his perspective, where he doesn't just survive, right? He ends up propelling, he ends up transformed, and then he ends up getting the king to the castle, going from the pit to the palace, right? And then when he sees the people that hurt him, in chapter 50, verse 20, he says, but as far as you thought evil against me, God meant to do me good. And that's not denial, that's transmutation, right? That's taking betrayal and turning it into boundaries, taking pain and turning it into purpose, right? Taking the pit and converting it into a foundation. So remember this, the pit isn't rejection, it's separation. The prison isn't delay, it's discipline. And the palace isn't luck, it's an alignment of who you're truly meant to be. So if you're in pit season, here's your practice. It's simple, but not easy, right? Because one, ask yourself, what's this season training me? Secondly, do the work of Joseph. Keep integrity, right? Keep building your skills when nobody's clapping, and stay disciplined when it's inconvenient. And then last but not least, we gotta refuse bitterness. Bitterness is the only prison you can carry with you into your next season.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Because Joseph didn't rise by revenge, right? He rose by refinement. So if your life feels delayed, you might not be getting denied. You might be getting refined, getting ready to go from the pit to the palace.
That's a bitch slap of truth right there.
Follow, like, and subscribe for more Bible and spiritual deep dives.
That boy is good.
Even us, oh, but I know God.